Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, I've done so many of these with Fleet Street Fox that I forgot that I was introducing it today. So I'm Dan Bloom, the online political editor, and this is Graham Hiscott, who's the business editor. And we have been combing through the details of, first of all, the energy price cap rise today, and secondly, the measures that have been announced by the Treasury to try and fight it. Now, the too long, didn't read, don't want to watch version is it's a massive bills rise, and the Treasury help is not quite enough to wipe it out, to put it mildly. Now, we're going to talk through some of the details of this, and we want to take your questions, practical, ethical, philosophical, whatever you want to ask. Just ping them in the comments box, and we'll deal with as many of them as we can before about 3:30, 25 to 4. So I'm going to start by asking Graham. You're the one who's covered the price cap rise. Tell us a bit about it. How much are my bills going to go up in April?
A lot. Well, it depends. Okay, so starting point. So take a step back, which is that Ofgem, who are the energy regulator, have this thing called the price cap. So it's designed pretty much as it sounds, really, which is to limit the amount that you're supposed to be paying. They look at that twice a year, once in April, once in October. They've announced today how much the price cap will be going up by in April the 1st. It's very significant in that it affects 22 million households. So that's pretty much 3/4 of all households in the UK. So what have they announced? So they have announced that come April the 1st, the average is if you're on a standard variable tariff, if you don't know quite what tariff you're on, it's a good chance that that's what you're on, will be going up by £693 a year, which is call it 50%, pretty much a 50% surge. So that'll take your annual bill to just under £2,000 a year, 1,971. Again, a caveat: everyone's usage is different, so the actual amount your bill will be come April may be less, significantly less perhaps, but it also could be significantly more. Now, one other thing to mention is that within that 22 million, there are 4.5 million households who are affected because they're on prepayment meters. Now, these are often, not exclusively, but often low-income households, and their bills, believe it or not, are actually going up by even more. They're going up by just over £700 a year to just over £2,000 a year. So yeah, that's the background in terms of what's happening in April. Maybe worth mentioning why it's all the stuff that happens behind the scenes that none of us really think about, I guess, most of the time, which is that the wholesale energy, which is basically your energy supply going out, buying the gas, buying the electricity to then sell on to you, the price of that has just it's gone through the roof, quadrupled over the last year. Lots of different factors, some of it COVID related, to do with economies starting up again after emerging from lockdowns, lots of demand, not enough other stuff, and we're paying the price.
So this is a question I don't know the answer to, Graham, but why is it a worse rise for people on prepayment meters? Because as Suzanne says, we're all already struggling, and they're struggling the most.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be to cover the cost of sort of supplying energy to you. So those examples I gave you, where it was just over 1,971, that's for a customer paying by monthly direct debit. So you're a relatively cheap customer to service. Basically, your monthly direct debit comes out of your bank, and there's not a huge amount of extra cost involved in collecting that money. Whereas if you're on a prepayment meter, it's quite costly because just servicing the meters and maintaining them, etc., comes with an extra premium. So yeah, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? The more hard up you are in terms of the way you sort of payment terms that you're on, you can actually be paying more. And also, coincidentally, if you pay in the old-fashioned way, or maybe it's not that old-fashioned for many people, which is to pay every quarter, every 3 months, when the bill lands on your doorstep, you also get clobbered. You also pay more. So it's the wrong way around, it seems, but that's how it is.
And tell me this, because I would say I'm an idiot, but I think I'm like a lot of people, where I looked at the fixed deals 6 months ago for my house, and I thought they were actually higher than the standard variable. So I'll just say on the standard variable. So that means I'm, screwed on April the 1st. It goes up overnight. All the people on fixed deals, am I right in thinking they're safe in April, but then they get to the point where their fixed deal expires, and then they won't be able to get one that's cheap enough, essentially.
Yeah, correct. So yeah, okay. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Once upon a time, not that long ago, perhaps a bit more than 6 months ago, it certainly, the advice would have always been, yeah, be savvy, look around, get a fix into a deal, and you'll be paying less than this standard variable or default tariff. That's all changed now. Now, what was the most expensive, that those standard variable tariffs were always the rip-off tariff you should never be on. Now, if you can get onto one of those, get onto it, because that's the cheapest option now. Why? Well, that's because the fixed rate tariffs, which are based on the companies going out and buying the energy that you are going to sort of sign up for the next 12 months or 2 years, that's so high that it's now more expensive to provide that to you than on the standard tariff, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the case. Now, there are going to be more people. There are people falling on. There are people. This is why back in October last year, it was estimated that 15 million people would be affected by the price cap. Now it's 22 million. Why? It's two reasons. One reason is that a lot of people who were on fixed rate tariffs, hundreds of thousands a month, have been coming off of those fixed rate tariffs and going on to these standard tariffs. Why are they standing on these standard tariffs? Well, like I just said, because it's now currently the cheapest thing. There's also been a whole load of companies, 26 companies, energy companies, that have gone bust. When those companies have gone bust, they've been taken over by the customer taken on by another supplier, but those customers have gone on to, again, the standard tariff. So that's why you've gone from 15 million customers being affected to now 22.
And I think I'm right in saying the cost of sort of not bailing out, but sort of taking on the customers of those firms that all went bust, there's a cost on people's bills to that as well. So is that on top of what's been announced today, or is it included in it?
It's included, and it's about £70 a year. So, but forgive me, it might be slightly more than that. But anyway, the point is, it was, yeah, and there was an argument that that shouldn't have gone onto the bill, and that in fact that should have been delayed somehow and paid back at a later point. But yeah, the fact is, because so many companies have gone bust, we all basically have to pick up the tab for that, and that's going to be loaded onto the bill from April as well. That's right. Yeah. So
I think you were telling me just before we came on air that we've got even worse news coming down the track in October. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. And in fact, we'll come on to the government measures in a second. But yeah, in the context of that is the fact that so we talked about wholesale prices, price of gas and electricity on the worldwide markets, which is basically the reason why bills are going up so much. So there's no sign of that coming down. Anytime soon. So as I said at the very beginning, Ofgem review these things twice a year. Come October, so we've got the average bill now as being, well, just under £2,000, 1,971. The forecast at the moment, it's a long way out, but for next October, they could go up to 2,300 or 2,400 a year. So we're talking about between last October, just gone, October coming, basically about £1,000 extra on your average bill. Like I say, average masks a lot of variations. So yeah, at the moment, no one's predicting that that bill's going to go the other way anytime soon. They will at some point, but don't hold your breath.
Yikes. So Louisa's question leads us neatly onto turning the tables and having you ask a few questions of me, Graham, because she says, is this because the government has paid out millions? In fact, it's billions, it's 400 billion or so, keeping the country going through the pandemic. No, it's about wholesale gas prices. But the fact that the government has paid out all this money on things like furlough means they're now trying to tighten the purse strings, critics say at the wrong time, by doing things like raising national insurance to clear some of that NHS backlog. And that is all coming at the same time in April. So today, Rishi Sunak, always an eye for a headline, has stood up precisely half an hour after Ofgem and announced a few things. So I'm going to kick over to Graham, who's then going to ask me a few questions about that.
Okay, exactly. So yeah, exactly. Perfectly timed. In fact, Ofgem was due to announce that all these price changes on Monday, and guess what? The Treasury wanted to get these announcements out today, so they brought forward the announcement. So yeah, there are a number of different things that they've announced, haven't they? Dan, can you just talk us through? One is about rebate, and one's to do with council tax. Can you just talk us through exactly what is being announced?
Yeah, so it's a three-pronged approach. the first thing that you'll notice is if you live in England and if you live in a band A, B, C, or D house, which is about 80% of houses, you will get a £150 rebate off your council tax. So that is to be applied kind of by the local authority at the start of the year. So potentially, we don't quite know yet, but it could be that your monthly bill is perhaps, whatever 150 divided by 12 is, sort of 13 or so pounds. Sorry if my maths is wrong, cheaper per month. And then it sort of springs back in April 2023. So that's one side of it. And then in October, you would get £200, and this is for all households who have electricity meters, which is pretty much everyone in the country. You get £200 off your bills for the year from October. Now, the hitch with that one is, unlike the council tax, 150 quid, this 200 quid has to be paid back. And they will essentially start clawing it back from the financial year that starts in April 2023. We don't know exactly when, but they'll claw it back at £40 a year for 5 years. And so essentially, it's all coming through the energy companies, this one. The government will loan the energy companies, I think it's something like 5 billion for this measure. They will all give £200 off every single household's bill, and then they will claw it back through making your bills higher. Yeah. All that is relying on the idea that this is a temporary spike in energy prices, and that actually the cap might come down, or that the rise will at least kind of level off and slow. I think the problem is that Graham is saying that's not very likely to happen necessarily. And then the third side of it is this warm home discount. But that's maybe not something to get too excited about because it already exists. It's a scheme that gives certain people on low incomes and certain pensioners £140 off their bills. It's being raised to 150, and it's being extended to just under 800,000 more people. So it will be a more generous scheme, but that again only comes next October. And, it's 2.7 million people. The vast majority of the country won't still be eligible for it. So it's a mixed bag, and the total of it is by far not enough to make up for the rises that are coming.
I don't know if you've do you think that the rebate will there's been some criticism, I don't know if you've heard the same, that it won't necessarily help those that need it most, while potentially helping those that also don't necessarily need it as much?
Yeah, so it depends sort of slightly which element you're talking about. One that's coming in for a lot of criticism is the council tax side of it, because the way council tax bans work is they were all set in 1991. And if it's a new build, you have to have a valuer go around the house and try and work out what it would have been worth if it had been built 30 years ago, which is a ridiculous system. And so you get some inequalities in those bands. You get some people in quite high bands who, still don't have much money, and you get people in low band houses who, maybe they live in a flat in London, who do earn quite a lot of money. So that's one part of it. And then the other side is it's a flat amount of money, which kind of it has never really, it's not really a thing that the governments usually try and do, just give, £200 to every Brit, because £200 to me is different to £200 to you, Graham, is different to £200 to Elaine, who's just asked a question about what will happen if bills get too high, and the question is, you still have to pay your bills, and if more people are going to go into fuel poverty. We've got people like the Resolution Foundation saying, I can't remember what the exact figure is, but it's a huge increase, isn't it?
Yeah, 2.5 million
won't be able to pay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So the I think the Resolution Foundation was saying that there are about 4 million households in fuel poverty, and they're predicting that will go up to about 6.5 million. When we think about 1 in 4 households, that's the sort of scale that this impact is going to have. The sort of impact it's going to have on so many. Dan, I'm interested what you think. How do you think this these measures from the Chancellor will go down with with Tory MPs? With you've obviously seen Labour's reaction to it. What do you think the sort of political reaction is to these measures?
Well, Labour's reaction is that this is not enough, and it's not going to touch the sides, and it's the wrong measures. There was a really sharp Labour reaction from Chris Bryant, which I'm going to I'm going to read out, which he can thank me later, but it shows the impact of what we're talking about here with everything going up in April. He said, £350 isn't going to touch the sides for my constituents. Gas and electricity up for the average family, £686. Fuel up by 314. The average weekly shop up by 385. Universal credit cut by 1,040. National insurance up by 150. And then frozen tax allowances thresholds will cost another 300. So that's £2,875, he claims, in a constituency where the average wage is £27,000. And you're being given off sort of £350 to deal with that, of which £200 has to be paid back in the next few years. So there's a real question here. In terms of Tory MPs, I mean, you had a few standing up in the debate saying, this is a wonderful package of measures, what a heroic Chancellor, etc. I think obviously some are probably not so predisposed to say that. And then for the ones who are wavering in the middle, the real moment is when their inboxes, or if their inboxes start being flooded with people who either realise what's coming down the track now, or it gets to April and a lot of people suddenly can't cope with those bills. Then it gets to May and they have another month of those bills. And that becomes a real problem, and the cost of living crisis becomes everything they face when they go back to their surgeries, their constituencies. Then the Tory MPs would come back to Westminster during the week and say, we can't cope with this, something's got to give, got to do something.
There's a question from Gary, but before I answer that, I'm interested, Dan, how do you think this is going to play out in the May elections, local elections, given that the bills will be going up in April? So they're we're in a bit of a sort of a it's been announced now, but actually they won't kick in until April. A month later, we'll have the local elections. What's your sort of your prediction for how that will play out in the elections? Will it be a factor? Do you think? Will it be a big factor? I should say.
I think it will be a huge campaigning issue in the election. In the elections, I should say. People like Labour are already, focusing on the cost of living and how the government's not doing enough. They will certainly do more of that. In terms of how it plays out in the results, local elections are always quite difficult to analyse because, especially this year, you've kind of got everything up in councils in Scotland, Wales and London, but each of those three have their own story. And then when it comes to the sort of shires and the heartlands in England, there aren't a huge number of seats compared to previous years that are up. And, you've got some strategists saying that actually Labour and the Tories are kind of not got that much wriggle room either way in those areas. And you won't see kind of these huge landslide Boris Johnson loses all the Tory councils sort of effect. So I think it will certainly affect how some people vote and that sort of thing. But local elections are always such a mixed bag that it's difficult. I don't think we'll necessarily get to a situation where you get to May the 10th and you say this has been a complete disaster and it's provable and it's because of the cost of living rise. It just feeds into the pain that people are feeling and feeds into the broader picture.
And the other pictures. I'm just going to ask Gary's really good question, which is, I'm going to fix rate until 2023. Is this good, or am I going to get blasted later on when the fixed rate ends? Okay, so the short answer is you're good for now. That's the good news, and you're among the minority. It's a significant minority. You actually are still on a fixed rate deal that runs through to 2023. So you don't need to worry in terms of you won't be affected by this increase in the price cap. Now, the caveat to that is what's going to happen next year. I mean, we are talking 2023 here. The risk is that when you come off of that fixed rate deal, depending on how early it is into January, then you could see your bills, you could be blasted, as you say, later. But, a year is a long time. So, the short answer is if you're on a fixed rate deal until 2023, sit tight. Certainly don't switch to a cheaper, don't try and look for a cheaper deal. I imagine you're on a good deal at the moment, I suspect.
If only we were all like Gary, hey? I've got to ask you, Graham, what deal are you on? Because you should be on the best of all, shouldn't you?
Yeah, you're not going to ask these things, Dan, but I am actually on a fixed rate deal. But that said, energy is only one part of all the bills that we're focusing on energy today. But my goodness, there's the other bills that are going up that we're talking about are very significant. So I don't know what last time you when you do the weekly shop, that's a regular bill that people are just seeing creep up, and it's kind of crept up on people. I think that one. other thing, I mean, petrol's a lot higher than it was a year ago. Oil prices are very high, so you expect that to go up higher still. Insurance, council tax, there's obviously a rebate there, but there's still with a net that will still be going up. Just diverting, thank you, Dan, from me back to Hannah, who's asked a question here. How is the £200 going to help, considering the average bill will be around £2,000 a year? Dan, do you want to answer that?
That is a very, very good question, Hannah. And the answer is the answer is potentially not enough. Basically, there was a big row about this today, and the Chancellor has taken what, not even uncharitably, just accurately, you would call a Tory approach to these things. He said it's not sustainable to keep holding the price of energy artificially low. He said, for me to stand here and pretend we don't have to adjust to paying higher prices would be wrong and dishonest. So he's very much he's kind of holding off his own backbenchers and saying, prices are going to go up. You are going to find it harder, the British public. This is going to be difficult. It's not my fault, it's global gas prices. And it's not the government's responsibility to make up for all that. And he's taking a very clear position on that, despite the headlines that you might see, probably not in the Mirror, but in some newspapers tomorrow about, Chancellor rides to the rescue, £350 for every home, that sort of thing. And Hannah encapsulates that point perfectly, because I think a lot of people will see this and think, oh, right, that's okay. But actually, are you going to remember your bills coming down by 350 from what they are now, or are you going to remember your bills going up by 350 from what they are, the week before?
Yeah.
So shall we ask Rachel? My gas and electric was £1.50 a day in November. It's now nearly £3 a day, and I only have the heating on about 5 hours a day. I dread to think how much higher it will get. I mean, the answer, it sounds like, Graham, is it could get a lot higher. It could go to £4 or £5 sort of thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. If it's nearly £3 now, then it sounds like you could broadly apply sort of 50% to that, and yeah, I mean that 5 hours a day. I mean, the fact that I think it's very easy to sort of overlook the idea, the people that are just having it really. I mean, 5 hours a day. Some people are having it on just eating on just one room in the house, potentially less than 5 hours a day. I mean, people are really making it's a bit of a cliche about the choosing between heating and eating, because it's often trotted out, but that's literally what is happening, and it's happening now, and it will be happening considerably more in from April onwards. People are going to be making decisions going without meals altogether, for potentially all day, just so they can have that heating on for a little bit. I guess the one good thing in inverted commas is that at least this is happening in April rather than potentially now, when of course we do generally use that far less heating. Less heating in the spring. Electricity tends to come down, usage comes down a bit, so that's why the impact of it could be it won't be as bad as obviously now, but having the heating on for 5 hours a day won't be an issue perhaps so much in April, but undoubtedly, yes, that per day cost is going to go up, and certainly next October, even with this help.
Well, blimey, Graham, we're both quite gloomy men, but that's probably the closest I can take it to finishing on a high note and a piece of good news today, which is saying a lot about how bad this is. We're going to call a lid on it there for today, but I should point out, and it's at the bottom of the screen, that we're going to have a cost of living expert discussing these sorts of issues and taking your questions every Thursday at 1 p.m. We're here to write about the policy, but we're also, as the Mirror, here to help and here to try and give whatever tips people can have within the pretty tight constraints of what's actually going on in the world, and the fact that the government is not going to step in beyond a certain degree on this. So we'll call time on it there, and so thanks very much for tuning in, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more of these as the weeks and months unfold.